This is an unprecedented event in the recent history of the Catholic Church. Not a street protest, not an ideological manifesto, not an open rupture, but something much rarer, colder, more destabilizing. A numerically significant group of priests from the same diocese who appealed directly to Rome against the decisions of their bishop, requesting formal clarification on the legitimacy of those choices. A gesture that cannot be dismissed as traditionalist folklore, nor reduced to simple local discontent. Here we are facing a test of the Church's governance structure. The story began in the Diocese of Charlotte, in the United States. A seemingly peripheral diocese, it suddenly found itself at the center of a case destined to become a landmark. Bishop Michael Martin is already known for restrictive interventions in the liturgical sphere. In fact, months earlier, he had drastically limited the celebration of the traditional Latin Mass, reducing it to a single authorized location in the entire diocese. A decision that had already generated discontent among the faithful and clergy, marking a first point of fracture. The bishop then introduced a series of restrictive liturgical norms, especially regarding the distribution of communion and established traditional practices. Decisions motivated as an exercise of episcopal authority, but perceived by a significant portion of the clergy as exceeding the limits established by universal liturgical law. And this is where the silent rift occurs. Dozens of priests, not just one or two, not an isolated fringe, but a significant percentage of the diocesan presbytery, decided to sign and send dubia to Rome. Not an open letter, not a media appeal. Dubia, the most impersonal, technical, and institutional instrument that canon law provides for seeking clarification on controversial points of doctrine or practice. An act that, by its very nature, presupposes obedience, not contestation. And this is precisely what makes this case explosive. This isn't rebellion. And for this very reason, the act is all the more serious. Because when priests don't disobey but ask Rome whether their bishop is correctly applying church law, the problem isn't disciplinary. It's structural. The heart of the conflict is liturgical. And as always, when the liturgy enters into crisis, it means that something deeper is giving way. The contested rules concern the possibility of receiving communion kneeling, the use of balustrades or kneelers. Elements that are not folkloristic remnants, but practices never formally abolished by universal law. Indeed, in some contexts, they are explicitly protected. The point raised by the priests is simple and devastating in its clarity. Can a bishop prohibit what the universal law of the Church permits? The question isn't ideological, it's legal. And that's why it's being addressed to the competent authority. The dubia don't accuse, they don't judge, they don't threaten, they ask. But they ask about issues that, if resolved one way or another, will have consequences far beyond the borders of North Carolina. There's another aspect that makes the case even more delicate: the pastoral dimension. Because some of the contested rules, if rigidly applied, risk affecting the most vulnerable faithful. Elderly, disabled, people for whom kneeling without support is not an act of devotion, but an almost impossible physical ordeal. Here, a weighty question arises. Where does the law end and pastoral charity begin? And above all, can a local law impede the concrete exercise of charity? At this point, Rome cannot ignore the situation. According to the recently reaffirmed rules governing the functioning of the Curia, formal requests must at least be acknowledged. The Council for Legislative Texts, the department responsible for canonical matters, is called upon to examine the dubia and, inevitably, to report back. Here comes a figure who remains in the background but dominates the entire scene: Pope Leo. It's reasonable to assume that the pontiff is informed, not through leaks, but through ordinary means. When a significant number of priests in a diocese submit a formal request regarding a sensitive liturgical issue, it's hard to imagine the matter remaining confined to a single office. The question isn't whether the Pope knows. The question is how and when Rome will decide to respond. All scenarios are problematic. If Rome were to openly support the bishop, the message would be clear. Episcopal authority can go so far as to restrict recognized practices and rites without the possibility of effective recourse. If Rome were to rule in favor of the priests, even partially a precedent would be set. Other dioceses, other presbyteries, other liturgical conflicts could follow the same path. The Pandora's box of liturgical governance would be definitively opened. Then there's the most likely and most frustrating option: postponement. A thorough study, a technical response limited to the specific case with no universal value. A solution that doesn't resolve, but suspends. And it leaves a widespread feeling. The Church is avoiding making decisions precisely when it should. This case must be read in the context of a broader crisis of confidence. After decades of scandals, doctrinal ambiguities, pastoral experimentation, and internal polarization, the relationship between clergy, faithful, and authorities is no longer what it once was. The gesture of the priests of Charlotte did not arise in a vacuum. It was born in a wounded church, where formal obedience often coexists with a profound and unspoken unease. And that's precisely what makes this case emblematic. There are no slogans, there are no banners, there are no fiery declarations. Just a formal, cold, canonical act. But behind that act lies a question that pervades the entire church today. Who really decides on the liturgy, and within what limits? The liturgy, once again, proves to be the litmus test of the ecclesial crisis, because it touches the heart of lived faith. And when the liturgy becomes a battleground for legal disputes, it means that the problem is no longer marginal. Charlotte's incident isn't a local one. It's a signal that Rome will have to interpret. And whatever interpretation it chooses, it will have a cost. Because this time, it is not a question of pastoral preference that is at stake, but the very balance between authority, law, and tradition in the church of our time. What do you think? If you liked the video, comment, Amen. God bless you.